document. Here we go. I think this is the last time I'm going to have to navigate this on a computer. I believe, hopefully, fingers crossed. Board of Alders notice, New Haven. The Legislation Committee of the Board of Alders will meet on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at 6:00 p.m. via video conference at https://bit.ly/3GQXLMV and by phone at 646-558-8656, webinar ID 910-3542-6966 to hear and act on the following items. OR-2021-0039. Zoning ordinance map amendments to change the designation of New Haven zoning map, grid number 12, to change the designation of 2.487 acres of land located at 78 Olive Street, map 225, block 0548, parcel 01100, from general business BA to central business / residence BD1 zoning district classification. Per order, Honorable Charles Decker, Chair. Attest, Honorable Michael Smart, City Clerk. These items are on file and available in the office of the City Clerk, room 202 at 200 Orange Street, New Haven, Connecticut, 06510. Since this meeting will be held using solely electronic equipment, participation by a quorum of the members at the same physical location is prohibited unless that location is made open to the public. Any member of the public may request in writing a physical location and any electronic equipment necessary to attend the meeting in real time no later than 24 hours prior to the meeting. Said person shall have the same opportunities to provide comment or otherwise participate in the meeting as would be afforded if the meeting were held in person, with the following exception. Under law, the committee is not required to adjourn or postpone the meeting if any person loses the ability to participate because of an interruption, failure, or degradation of any person's connection to the meeting by electronic equipment. For accommodations to view the meeting, please email publictestimony@newhavenct.gov or call 203-946-6483. For accessibility related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 voice or 203-946-8582 TTY-TDD. Public comment / testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2:00 p.m. on the day of the meeting. If you wish to present testimony at the meeting, you must register in advance at https://bit.ly/3GQXLMV or by calling 203-946-6483 or emailing publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2:00 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Public can view the meeting at https://bit.ly/3GQXLMV or listen by phone at 646-558-8656, webinar ID 910-3542-6966. The password to listen by phone only is 962-487-537. All right. Good evening, colleagues. I will ask members of the committee to introduce themselves. I will acknowledge other colleagues from the board who are not on this committee who have joined us. I'm going to say a quick word about how we're going to proceed tonight, and then we will hear the one item we have before us. I'm just going to call on you in the order that you're on my screen currently. Alder Kupo, introduce yourself, please. Alder Kupo. Oh, I think
Alder Ellen Kupo, Ward 8. Sorry about the background.
Hi, Hunter. Alder Furlow.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Richard Furlow, Ward 27.
Welcome, sir. Alder Morrison.
Good evening, Alder Morrison, Ward 22.
Welcome, Alder. Alder Sabin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Alder Eli Sabin, Ward 7.
Welcome. Alder Ferraro Santana.
Good evening, Alder Rosa Ferraro Santana, Ward 13.
Welcome, Alder. I would also like to acknowledge and thank Alder Sal DeCola, who is joining us this evening, and Alder Alex Gougenet, who's also with us. I'm just looking at the attendees list to see if we have other alders present. I don't see any currently. Well, we will recognize them if they join us. So thank you, everyone. I see we have many members of the public who are here with us today as well. So we have one item before us. So I will say two things about it before we get started. One is, given that there are currently at least 16 people already here to testify from the public potentially, we're going to do what we often do to ensure that everybody who wants to testify has a chance to testify. We're going to limit public testimony to 3 minutes. So if you are planning to give a longer statement than 3 minutes, I would advise you to start cutting it down now and really taking out the main points. And I would also say that if you email your full testimony, which could be much longer than 3 minutes if you want, as long as it's emailed to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov. And then that entire testimony will be entered into the public record. So that is an option as well. The other thing I'll say before we get started is what we have before us is a zoning change. And so I'm going to ask colleagues to keep their questions that they may have on the item for the presenters focused on the thing that's actually before us this evening, which is a zoning change. And I will tell members of the public to do the same. Please stay on the topic of what's actually before us today. So making comments or testimony about, for example, the sorts of developments that would be possible with the zoning change that are not possible now, perfectly valid, perfectly fine testimony. But getting into nuts and bolts of things that are not actually in front of us today will be out of order. With that, I'd also like to recognize Alder Carmen Rodriguez, who is joining us as well. Thank you, Alder Rodriguez, for being with us. And I see Alder Marchand, who's a member of this committee, joining as well. So Alder Marchand, once you are ready and can come on camera, you can introduce yourself, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Alder Furlow, I see your hand. I will recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a point of clarification, would questions or comments in regards to the actual development be appropriate for this meeting?
So what is before us again is the change that potentially would allow, certain sorts of developments. And of course, there is an actual development that has gone through or is going through a process, but what is in front of us tonight is the actual zoning change, if that is clarification enough.
Yes, I just wanted to make that clarification through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think Alder Marchand will join us, and I'll recognize him when he comes on camera, but for now, if staff would like to bring the presenters, the makers of the item in, and we will hear the item before us, which is item 1, the zoning ordinance map amendment. OR-2021-0039 for the sake of completion.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Alders. My name is Christopher McKeon. My office is at 900 Chapel Street in New Haven. I represent PMC Property Group and 78 Olive Street Partners, which is the applicant petitioner here this evening. My co-counsel is attorney Marjorie Shansky, who I see is present. And also with me tonight is Dr. David Woods, who is a certified planner with SLR Consulting. I think the easiest way to get started would be for me to share my screen and specifically show what exactly our petition is requesting, if I may.
And as you're getting set up, I will first invite Alder Marchand to introduce himself as a member of this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Adam Marchand. I'm the Alder for the 25th Ward, member of the committee, and I apologize for being late. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And I will, again, as you're getting set up, I'll remind you and anyone else who's going to speak tonight, just to remember to give your address for the record as well. I missed whether you did that or not, and I apologize. But if not, now would be a good time.
My name is Chris McKeon. My address, office address is 900 Chapel Street, 11th floor, New Haven, Connecticut.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I share my screen?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you have that ability. Mr. Lucas, says you should have the, there you go.
Okay. So this parcel here in the existing zoning map to the left, this is the parcel known as 78 Olive Street. It currently contains the Strauss Adler apartment building. It is a 2.487 acre site, currently located, as you can see, in the BA zone. The parcel that I have my cursor on right here, hopefully you can see that, which is the corner of Chapel and Olive, as well as the parcels to the south here, the opposite corner of Chapel and Olive, and this parcel below that I know as 87 Union Street. Those three parcels were changed from the BA zone to the BD1 zone back in 2014. Our application or petition represents a completion of the rezoning effort, which started back in 2014. And indeed, when these three parcels were rezoned in 2014, it was anticipated, if not encouraged, that not only the 78 Olive Street parcel, but also the parcel across the street, which currently is occupied by the Firestone auto business, that those parcels be changed from the BA zone to the BD1 zone. And in the drawing to the right, showing the proposed zoning, it shows you in, I guess it's pink, how the BD1 zone is logically extended to encompass the 78 Olive Street parcel. So that very simply is the petition that we have made. The same rationale, if you will, that was applied to the parcels to the south is applicable, if not more applicable now, to justify the change in zone from BA to BD1. Especially given the change that has occurred in this location since 2014. It will enable this parcel to be developed for transit-oriented developments. And as you can see, it directly abuts the railroad tracks, and opposite the railroad tracks being the State Street station. Obviously, its location ideally suits this parcel for transit-oriented development. Specifically, we put our petition before the Downtown Worcester Square CMT on January 18th of this year. And on January 19th, we appeared before the City Plan Commission, who gave a favorable recommendation for the zone change and specifically found that the proposed map amendment is in full compliance with the standards and requirements of sections 181 and 182 of the Charter of the City of New Haven and section 62 D2 of the New Haven zoning ordinance. In connection with the City Plan Commission hearing, we submitted a planning report prepared by Dr. David Woods, showing the consistency with the comprehensive plan of the City of New Haven, as well as the aforesaid sections of the charter and the regulations. And we are here tonight to obtain hopefully a similar recommendation for approval of the zone change that, as I indicated, has been in the works going back to 2014. And I, as well as my co-counsel and Dr. Woods, are available for questions. That simply is, simply put, our petition before the committee.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else from your team have anything to add before I open for questions? All right, seeing no hands shooting up, I will ask, are there any colleagues on this legislation committee who have any questions for the presenters about this zone change? Alder Sabin, and generally, if you have questions, you can either raise your hand physically, as Alder Sabin did, or else you can use your little, hand raise tool.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here, Mr. McKeon. I was wondering if you could explain to all of us the differences between, or some of the differences between the BA zone and the BD1 zone.
Yes, I certainly can. And in doing so, I'm referring to the City Plan Commission report, which draws attention to some of those differences. In the BA zone, the floor area ratio, which is a density requirement, is 2.0, and in the BD1, it is 6.0. Except where the BD1 zone adjoins or is immediately adjacent to certain residential zones, RS1, RS2, RM1, and RM2. In the BA zone, which is the current zone, there is no direct height limit. And height is limited by other zoning factors. And in the BD1 zone, there is also no direct height limit. However, where the BD1 zone is adjacent to or adjoins the same residential zones, there is a 70-foot height limitation. Additionally, in the BA zone, there is no minimum for usable open space. However, in the BD1, there is a 50-foot per dwelling unit requirement for usable open space. That requirement can be reduced to 25 feet per dwelling unit if the site is within 1,000 feet of public usable open space. There is no requirement for common amenity space in the BA zone, yet in the BD1 zone, there is a requirement of 50 feet of common amenity space per dwelling unit. And lastly, the parking requirement is different and typical for more dense development. In the BA zone, there is a requirement of 1 parking space per dwelling unit. And in the BD1 zone, it is 1/2 space per dwelling unit. Those are the substantial differences. There are differences in use as well. Those uses are very well set out in the CPC report in terms of what is permitted as of right or requires a special exception. That's a pretty exhaustive list, so I'm not sure you want to hear that information.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Sabin. And on that note, I will direct colleagues, if you want to read further, to the City Plan Commission report, which is in your packet, which had a positive recommendation for approval, as the attorney said. If you want to geek out on use tables the way that I do sometimes, it's right there for you. So, do other members of the committee have questions for the presenters of this item? Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is the existing structure on the property in question as it fronts Olive Street, is it under 70 feet in height? The Strauss Adler building?
I do not know, but I can only tell you from my personal observation of that very fact that I looked at the other day. And I do recall the passage of the prior zone changes to accommodate what was then the Spinnaker development as well as the 87 Union development. And those developments seem to me to be of similar height to the facade of the Strauss Adler building on Olive Street. So I believe it is close to 70 feet, although I believe it might be a little lower. Just from my observation, sure I think.
I believe it's 4 stories, perhaps
Yeah.
with mechanicals on top. So perhaps it's 5 stories in total or something like that.
I agree with you. On the front, I believe it is specifically 4 stories. I don't know that, as you move deeper into the site, there's a stack on the building and other roof apparatus. But I believe the height of the Strauss Adler building was taken into account when the 70-foot height was, the 70-foot limit on the height was, that was a text change done at the same time as the map change was done back in 2014.
I'm trying to search my memory banks for that. They're not as quick as they used to be because I was on the commission and on the board back then, but I do remember it being used as a reference point. Of course, one of the principles of our work as a zoning authority is when we make text and map changes is to try to move towards the direction of greater compliance. We recognize, of course, that a lot of the built environment in New Haven predates the zoning, although the Strauss Adler conversion was later, that building was there for a long time. And so when we look to update the code, either through map or text changes, we always try to move existing structures as in the direction of greater compliance. And so I just wanted to double check to see that we're not inadvertently putting in place a map change that would put that building out of compliance. I don't think so, but I just wanted to try to get more clarity on that point. And so if there's another member of your team who wants to opine on that, I'd welcome any input they might have. Thank you on that point. One more thing, which is we discussed this a little bit at the City Plan Commission meeting, which is that when you look at the map, you see that there will be a couple of orphaned areas of BA zone adjacent. Those are my terms, little islands of BA zone surrounded by other zones. And it was just a question about, did the applicant give thought to proposing that those areas be converted to the BD1 as well? Or did they not enter the discussion with the city staff on that point?
Are you asking that question of?
I am asking that question.
Yeah.
Yes, and your answer would be
Yeah.
much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, I am aware of the other parcels that were suggested for rezoning as well. I do not have the ability to add those parcels to our application. At one point in time, and I've had discussions with folks from economic development where I thought the city itself, or perhaps City Plan Commission, might try to piggyback, if you will, onto our petition. And I believe that there is a notice and procedural issue with proceeding that way. So it would have to be part of a separate petition, although one that I think would be natural and logical in light of the prior changes, and more importantly, in light of what is actually happening in terms of development in those areas. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Obviously, you brought forward a proposed map change for a set of reasons that's different than what the city staff might be looking at. And so I note that our new city plan director is here. Probably she's read those reports and will have opinions about that in the future. I just would note that your earlier comment about this map change completing the work that was started before, well, maybe it advances the work, but perhaps it doesn't exactly complete it. That remains to be seen. But I understand that you're carrying forward your portion of that work based on a different set of reasons. And so, but it's something we as members of the board of alders will be wanting to look at, think about, and talk with our city staff about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. I'd also like to recognize Alder Kimberly Edwards, who is here with us this evening. Attorney Shansky, is your hand up to respond to Alder Marchand's question?
Thank you. It is. This is Attorney Marjorie Shansky, also representing PMC from 61 East Grand Avenue in the beautiful Quinnipiac River Historic District, home of the recently opened and refurbished Grand Avenue Quinnipiac River Bridge. Thank you. Alder Marchand, the fact of the petition only embracing the property owned by the petitioner is of course quite intentional. It would not be appropriate to attempt to rezone property not owned by the applicant. On the other hand, as you know, under the New Haven zoning ordinance, the City Plan Commission is charged with the constant review of the zoning ordinance and the zoning map. So at any point at which the city, through the commission, deemed it to be appropriate to rezone the other parcels, it's fully within their authority and jurisdiction to do so. I would also suggest that the Firestone building is certainly not an orphan parcel. It is a fully functioning, economically beneficial use of the land, which may be, and I don't know the details, so I can't say it with abject assurance, but I suspect that may be the case of the other parcels as well, so that they are not of need or of any internal aspiration to change their zoning. But it has been since the time of the rezoning for Spinnaker and 87 Union, the expressed intention of the city to go further and to include 78 Olive, as well as possibly other parcels. But that's why we're here. And thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Shansky.
All set, Alder Marchand?
All set. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks. Alder Furlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the response from the attorneys. I'd like to hear more specifically from city staff in regards to this proposed map amendment and how this particular amendment will be in line with our comprehensive plan and how that all flows together with the objectives of what we set forth some years ago.
Well, it's aligned with the city's comprehensive plan. Well, first and foremost, good evening, alders.
Good evening.
And thank you for having having us as planning staff here tonight. With that said,
Can you just give your name and address for the record as well, please?
Oh, William Long, 165 Church Street, New Haven.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. With that said, it is aligned with the city's comprehensive plan for two main reasons, or three main reasons. One is because it is in accordance with the current planning doctrine of creating transit-oriented development. Because of the fact that it's near the train station, people will have the ability to walk to the train station. People will have the ability to use mass transit, and therefore, you know, the reduction in parking is not necessarily warranted. And again, that is in the comp plan. The comp plan does say to promote transit-oriented development to reduce the number of parking spaces. The other thing is by creating transit-oriented development, this proposal is also aligned with the city's comprehensive plan because it allows for mixed-use development. And with mixed-use development, it allows for more commercial amenities, you know, definitely at street level. And also that creates jobs because that promotes economic development, economic opportunities for people who may not be able to get jobs otherwise. And it also allows for small business entrepreneurs to be able to open shops and so forth within the city. Again, all of that creates more of a vibrant downtown within the city, which is definitely aligned with the city's comprehensive plan. And the other point about the city's comprehensive plan is that the city's comprehensive plan mentions or recommends creating more housing, definitely within downtown, definitely within the city. And again, with mixed use, you have commercial on the ground floor, but definitely residential above, you know, on the upper stories. So it is definitely aligned with the city's comprehensive plan. And I hope that answers your question, Alder.
If I may add, this is David Woods of SLR Consulting, 190, my office is 195 Church Street. The other element of this that you look at, I identified three areas to reiterate Deputy Director Long's comments of, it's shown on the future land use plan as downtown mixed-use residential. It's consistent with the recommendation of such uses closer to the edge of downtown areas that will increase housing and mixed-use development. And third, the property is located adjacent to the State Street Station, and the principles of walkability, sustainability, and livability are enhanced by its location and commuting into New Haven to State Street Station. I said, I wish I lived right there. It'd be a lot easier.
Thank you. Just one other question, Mr. Chair. And thank you both Director Long and Mr. Woods for your answer. So I guess more specifically, and I know it was already mentioned, but I just like for it to be a little clearer, what is able to be built there now, or what will be built there after this proposed amendment change, should it pass, that it's not able to be built there presently? Did that question make sense?
I assume that question's directed to me.
Whomever's qualified to answer.
Well, I certainly can answer. There are many different things that could be built there, depending on the use that you would want to put to the property. If we're talking specifically about multifamily use, the current zoning has parameters for density under BA. It requires more parking. It requires or it enables you to build less building and less density of residential units on the site. So the Bd1 zone allows for more dwelling units. And depending on the particular development and where it would be located on the site, those factors can change. So Right now, we're making the petition to change the zone to the BD1 zone with no accompanying text change to the regulations. So if the parcel were to be rezoned to BD1, the identical parameters would apply to it that would apply to other properties within the BD1 zone. Is that your question, or is your question more directed toward a particular type of development?
Well, I just really wanted to stay on topic of what we're talking about. We had my colleague from the 7th Ward had asked for a more detailed explanation of these zones. And so I was just following up on what this zone will actually open up for development. And so we know that it does allow higher density. And so I guess I was just trying to be imaginative to think of what that would look like in that specific area, which is not present there now, just to kind of imagine now that this zone amendment is being proposed, now we can do the following, which wasn't permitted before. So that's what I was getting at. And I think you did answer it, but I just wanted to kind of gear the conversation towards that way.
I could add to it that there is obviously an existing multifamily building on the site right now, containing 146 units, which in the current zone requires it to have 146 parking spaces, which, given its location and given the very recent history of the neighborhood and what's happening there in terms of development, 146 parking spaces is just too many. There's no reason to have a giant parking field in areas that are this conducive to transit-oriented development. So an immediate effect on the existing use is a reduction in parking, thereby rendering the rest of the site potentially able for development.
Yep.
So I don't want to seem like I'm being cagey or vague, but that is a direct example of what the zone change will do to the current use.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No more questions.
Great, thank you, Alder Furlow. Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had to walk away for a second, so this was already asked. I apologize. But just trying to get a visual in regards to how tall that particular building would be, because when I think about, because that building is kind of like on that train line, right? And so how tall would that building be? Like, I heard you mention, I don't know what I heard you mention. I thought I heard something that sounded kind of really, really big. And so I just wanted to know, once again, how tall would this particular building be?
We don't, with this petition, we're not actually proposing a building. Okay. And this is just to enable the zone to be put in place, which could give rise to developments that will be subject to the existing regulations of the BD1 zone.
I think to make it germane to this particular project, I would guess I was just trying to understand, because depending on the parcels that are used, does this particular zone have like a limit in regards to the height or anything like that? Or does the zone just allow for the, well, the density will help to determine height sometimes too. Because if the density is 200 people versus, 800 people, that will increase, like the height of the area, because the going out wise is not as big, but going up, it will definitely give you more of an ability to build. So I just was trying to get an idea. Does this, am I on the right path with what I'm saying?
You are. You're exactly right. The zoning requirements, other than a specific height limitation, govern how much of a building you can put on the site, not just in terms of how high it is, but how big it is. So that shapes, in the BD1, that shapes the size of the building that you can build there. I would point out that in the BD1 zone, based on the changes that were made back in 2014, where you have properties in the BD1 zone that are adjacent to certain residential zones, including the residential zone across the street on Olive Street, there is a height limitation on properties that are adjacent to those residential zones of 70 feet. There also is lower density required. And the idea is to not have a residential neighborhood with buildings sort of all roughly this height, and then immediately next door you have an abrupt change in height. That was the concept. I think back in 2014, that was the rationale behind those text changes.
Okay, thank you. I thought I heard 70 feet. That just seems so big. But okay, all right. Well, thank you for that.
Well, if I may, Alder Morrison, just to give you perspective, 70 feet, you figure that 1 story is about 12 feet a story. So if you do the math of 70 divided by 12, you come out to about 6 stories. If that gives you if that gives you a sense of scale.
And that's why I am a social worker, deputy director. So I get it. It's a tall building, but thank you. It does give me, you giving that explanation gives me like 5, 6 floors, something like that, versus thinking, when I heard 70 feet in my head, I'm like, are we talking about buildings as tall as those buildings in like New York and things of that sort? So thank you. Thank you for that. That's helpful.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. And that's also a good good example of what I meant when I said at the beginning that we should be keeping our questions about the zoning, which I think that was a perfect example of keeping the question to the zoning. As a social worker, you're also a teacher, we know, as part of that job. So that's great. I'll ask if other colleagues have questions for the presenters. I will also remind folks that we have upwards of 25 people here from the public. So if you have urgent questions, by all means. But if you have questions that are maybe a little less urgent, maybe we can save them for after public comment. Seeing no one with a burning question for right now, we thank you all. Please stick around because we may have some more questions after we hear from the public. But thank you. And so, knowing that the answer is yes, I will ask, are there any members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? And Misty, we can start bringing them in one by one. So I'll remind, as Arthur is getting set, I will remind folks of what I said before in case anyone came late. The 2 things to note are we're limiting public testimony to 3 minutes. If you have longer testimony, please submit it in writing. If you do, then it'll be a matter of the public record, just as if you had said it aloud. I'm going to ask Alder Marchand to please keep time once the individual starts speaking. And two, just again to emphasize what is before us legally, what is our charge as a committee, is the zoning, not a specific development, but the underlying zoning change, because that's what we're potentially going to vote on tonight. So with all of that, Mr. Nacht, you can start when you're ready. Just please make sure you give your name and address for the record as you begin.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? It's Arthur Nacht, 312 Audubon Court here in New Haven. I'm grateful to the committee for taking public testimony, and I will respect the 3-minute request, and also respect the fact that you do not wish to hear about subjects other than specifically having to do with zoning, although I would have a lot to say about this building's possible design. But going to the question of zoning, how is it possible that the committee or the city would contemplate zoning permission to build a 13-story building which will tower over Worcester Square, which is only 2 blocks away from the site? If you want to maintain a quality appearance to downtown New Haven, it cannot be composed of these kinds of buildings, which are towers. 13 stories is way out of proportion to the low-rise community feeling which surrounds it. And I think this would be a terrible precedent. And I am deeply concerned about the impact of this building on Worcester Square. I do not live on Worcester Square, but I think and I hope you also cherish the feeling of that kind of community. Thanks, that's all I have to say.
Thanks very much for sharing your testimony. Are there any members of the committee who have any questions for Mr. Nacht? Seeing none, thanks so much for giving your testimony tonight, and we will hear the next member of the public. I see Ms. Farwell is joining us. So when you are ready, please turn on your camera, and you know the drill, but name and address for the record, and you can begin. Ms. Farwell, are you with us?
Yes,
Oh, there you are.
yes. It's a little different here, the format of the screen tonight. Thank you. I actually didn't expect to be brought on at this time. Would it be possible for me to speak a little bit later in the meeting? I hadn't raised my hand yet.
That will be fine.
Thank you.
If staff could just make a note of that, that would be great. All right, I see Mr. Knight now in the room with us. So Mr. Knight, once you're ready, please turn on your camera if possible, and give your name and address for the record, and you can proceed.
Hello, my name is George Knight. I live at 30 Court Street in the Worcester Square Historic District Commission, this historic district. I'm an architect in town, and my office is on Chapel Street. I've lived in New Haven for about almost 30 years. And I guess I wanted just to say how exciting it is to be contemplating such a proposal as this in our city, which we all love, and which I think we really want to see grow in the way that is sensible and is productive for everyone in town. And so, as I mentioned to Alder Sabin, who's been wonderful and sharing progress and soliciting feedback on this proposal, it's rather exciting to be contemplating this opportunity. And I think it gives us New Haveners a chance to assess, what might come of our more recently found popularity as a destination to live and work and play. And so I think one has to assess what has been proposed very seriously, because I think it tells us a lot about what we might look forward to and the opportunities that might be available to us. And I guess I was surprised to see in the proposal a real lack of civic contribution and benefit. It seemed to me baldly about a greater amount of development space, but without any civic enrichment of the city. And I think that that wouldn't be a problem if the proposal wasn't in fact asking for what I think is an extraordinary alteration of our zoning, which probably is in need of a comprehensive reconsideration. I think we're probably all aware of that, but this is a rather specific instance, and I would have anticipated a more careful and generous set of offerings to accompany this ask than what we've seen. So I feel that I agree with comments about the scale of this building, and I think it really does have to be considered comprehensively with any broader changes in the zoning. But I can say with certainty that what has been offered to us is rather paltry, and I would be sorry and sad if New Haven accepted a building like this, because I think we can look to places like Stanford, who has sponsored recent developments
30
that
seconds.
I think has disfigured irredeemably the public image of that city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Mr. Knight? Seeing none, thanks for taking the time, sharing your thoughts. And we'll have the next member of the public, please. I see Carolyn Patterson. If you're ready, you can give your name and address for the record. You have 3 minutes and go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the space to talk. My comments are in alignment with the previous speakers. I think.
Can you give your name and address for the record, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Carolyn Patterson, 39 Worcester Place in Worcester Square. My comments are in alignment with the two previous speakers in light of the fact that I'm confused about the height issue, which there's no height limit for the new BD1 zoning, yet there seems to be this talk of 70 feet, which is 6 stories, but 13 stories is egregious, in my opinion, for our neighborhood, for our tiny historic neighborhood. And also that there would be half a space of parking for each tenant, which the reduction in parking, because people might be taking the train, I'm not quite sure that that is an equal equation to the amount of new buildings that already are being built in Worcester Square. So that's my main concern, is that this is an enormous addition to already 1,500 apartments that are slated to be occupied in our neighborhood quite soon. So that and the safety issues surrounding our neighborhood, which is comprised of, small streets and one park, which looks big now, but I think it'll be getting smaller and smaller as people occupy the area. So that's mostly what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your testimony. Any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. And we'll take the next member of the public, please. I see Linda Reeder coming on camera. You can go ahead and give us your name and address for the record, please, and then you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Linda Reeder, 96 Lyons Street. I'd just like to clarify that while the limit, if you build at the sidewalk line on Olive Street is 70 feet, there's no limit as you move back on the site. And that's why PMC has proposed a 13-story building to make a tall building, I'm assuming to maximize parking. And I really believe that's incongruous with the neighborhood and will have a negative impact. And I also think that I just wish the city would stop reacting on a case-by-case basis to grant exceptions or change zones at the request of individual property owners. I think one reason we have zoning is because it assures equal treatment of all property owners in the zone, and it allows buyers to understand what they're allowed to do and what their neighbors are allowed to do before they purchase that property. And when you make a change on a piecemeal basis, you don't always look at the overall impact on a neighborhood-wide scale of the traffic, pedestrian, biker safety, and other issues, and there can be unintended consequences. So I agree with George that it would be good to look at zoning comprehensively, go neighborhood by neighborhood, get neighborhood input and so on. But at this time, I know there's a lot of demand for housing in New Haven, and that creates pressure to accept any new housing development, no matter how flawed. But I'd like to ask that you remember that the impacts of poor decisions made today are going to be felt by the city for generations. If you think about some of the urban renewal plans from 50, 60, 70 years ago, like the Oak Street connector and how it damaged neighborhoods in ways that are still felt today. And good intentions can have bad consequences. And I urge you to vote against this proposed zoning change for 78 Olive Street. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for the clarification on the height issue as well. My understanding matches yours, and I'll probably ask one of our zoning experts after the public testimony to clarify that. But my understanding is the same as what you laid out. So thank you for that. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, we thank you, and we'll hear the next member of the public, please. I see Ethan Rodriguez Torrent.
Hi, hello.
Hello, if you're ready, go ahead, name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Ethan Rodriguez Torrent. I live at 86 Foster Street in New Haven. And hello to all of my former alders. So I'm just here to talk about the PMC's request to change zoning on Olive Street. This is a zoning request change. It's not an abstract change, so they've indicated very specifically what they want to do with the property, and it's to build a 13-story apartment building there. I know the city plan has said it's fine, but as a committee of the Board of Alders, I hope that you are all considering, long-term what's best for the city. I know you want to improve more housing. We all want to improve more housing. We want more housing here. We want specifically affordable housing. And I'll note that 90% of this housing proposed is going to be unaffordable. But we can't afford to have a short memory in this case or fail to consider the future. I think it's important for everyone here to remember that PMC worked to block new housing construction in Worcester Square for 4 years over the course of 5 separate lawsuits from 2016 to 2019. One of these was just across the street, and it was literally the same zoning change. They were trying to change to BD1. And at that time, PMC, I think, filed 5 or 6 different lawsuits. So this whole song and dance that we heard about, we need to complete the BD1 zone, and we hope that adjacent parcels will also end up as BD1. It's literally the exact opposite of PMC's posture over the course of all those lawsuits. So I don't think that New Haven should be doubling down on a developer that actively tries to block other development. I think that sends a terrible message for all developers, and also just long-term doesn't give us more housing. it maybe gives us a net neutral housing and more of it is owned by PMC. Attorney Shansky, who's on this call, like actually literally represented PMC a couple of years ago in trying to block across the street the development on Chapel Street and another adjacent parcel from changing their zoning to be able to develop. So, I mean, it's pretty duplicitous for them to come here and say like, oh yeah, you know, we're just trying to complete the BD1 zone. I don't think that's the case. I think PMC wants more property for PMC. I don't think they're interested in what happens with the community or what happens with the neighborhood. In fact, I think they are interested in stopping competition. So they're going to simply work. If you give them this extra
1 minute left
room to work with, sure. They're going to stop other apartment buildings from being built. PMC also has a storied history in the city of being a terrible landlord. I think they're the only landlord in the city that the city has publicly asked to leave. The Economic Development Department a few years ago said, PMC, please sell. That's a New Haven Independent article. If you want to hear more about PMC, learn more about PMC, look them up in the Connecticut Judicial Branch, and you can see all the lawsuits filed against them by tenants who have had issues with them, flooding that wasn't addressed, heat issues that weren't addressed, et cetera, myself included. And you can also see the various issues they've had with the city and getting in the way of development. So I think if the Board of Alders wants more housing, PMC is not the way to go, and you will not get more housing. You'll just get more PMC housing and less other housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your perspective, your experience, and we will take the next member of the public. I see Mr. John Martin has joined us, so you can go ahead and give your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Hi, John Martin, 93 Pearl Street in New Haven, Connecticut. Yeah, thank you for letting me speak. I think, yeah, I've really appreciated the discussion tonight and all the comments by everyone. I have a lot of thoughts about the project at large and a lot of the comments, but to focus on zoning tonight, I think I'm specifically interested and really believe that we need more density in our city. I think that there are a lot of pros to having density in the city. It's environmentally friendly and neighborhood friendly in almost every way. It reduces car traffic because folks like often expect to be able to walk. It's right. This particular site is right next to the train. More density means more people, increasing demand for local amenities. You know, our farmers market that is beloved in Worcester Square, like, well, maybe can have another day of the week. More coffee shops, restaurants, things that Worcester Square doesn't have right now. I think also, of course, like the obvious reducing individual carbon footprints through just efficiencies of living close to one another and sharing housing together is really important, and we need more of it. This project specifically is directly next to a major train station and only a few blocks from downtown, which is where density is best located. And it's being built on an existing parking lot. And yeah, I'll trade inefficient car parking for efficient housing any day of the week. I think also in terms of its height and worries about its height, I think its immediate context on Olive Street, on Chapel Street, and on State Street is already very dense with a lot of other tall buildings. We have going down Orange Street on Audubon and McQueenie buildings. Like you can get a feel for what a 10-story building, 12-story building looks like over there. And it's really not something that I think anyone thinks twice about. And so I think that the height,
1 minute left.
People are really getting nervous about the height of it, but I think that's what density means. We need the housing and we need the density in the city. And so I think from a zoning point of view, allowing density to kind of move forward and for then this project to then go through other other layers of pressure and checks in the system is a good thing. So I'm in favor of this project passing zoning specifically, so that it can go on to the next series of projects that we can apply pressure and shift discourse where we need to. So thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you for taking the time and for your perspective. Any questions for Mr. Martin from the committee? Seeing none, I would like to first off recognize Alder President Walker Myers, who has joined us. Welcome. And we will hear the next member of the public, who is Alex Worrell, who is joining us. If you could give your name and address for the record, we can see you,
Yeah.
so you can get started.
Thank you. My name is Alex Worrell, and I live at 26 Academy Street, right on Worcester Square. And I'm here tonight just to talk about how zoning is not some abstract concept that I think, as Mr. Rodriguez Torrent mentioned, this isn't just an Excel column that we're changing over from one designation to another. This is a very specific request brought about by a very specific developer. And this developer is known to be a bad actor in the city. Tenants do not like this developer. The city historically does not like this developer. What they are asking for and what they are offering are not at all equal. I know that it is beyond the purview of this committee to think about things like what they're going to do with the zoning exception. But I would also urge you to think about the consequences, about what they're going to do with this. PMC is not a charity. They are a developer, and they seek to make a profit. That is their purpose. And we have historically seen in the city the lengths they're willing to go in order to secure their profit margins. They have abused our court system. They have sabotaged both neighbors and neighborhoods in their attempts to get things done. I also want to think about what it is that they're offering the city. Alder Sabin has been great about communicating with the neighborhood and about soliciting feedback from the neighborhood regarding whatever deal may arise from this. But I would urge y'all to think about not granting a zoning exception to somebody unless they have proven that they're willing to give something back to the city. This is
1 minute.
Thank you. This is your opportunity to exercise leverage over a developer whom the city knows to be a bad actor. Make sure that if they do get this zoning exception, which is in fact disproportionate, which does not in fact take into account 1,500 units that are being added contrary to the express wishes of PMC, what are they offering in terms of affordable housing? Think about what is the base salary for a teacher in New Haven. And once you think about that, and it's astonishingly low, where does that fall within the bracket of affordability that they have offered vis-a-vis Alder Sabin? They've talked about a 60 to 80% of median income as their affordable token housing. Is that actually realistic for people living on New Haven governmental salaries? For people who work for the Board of Education? Please think about this not as some abstract question of zoning, but think about this as a specific request from a specific corporate entity. These people are not our friends. These people are
Time to
not
wrap
our
up.
friends. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, I am being told by staff that there's no one else in the attendees list who currently has their hand raised to testify or signed up ahead of time other than Anstress Farwell, who I know. I see hands. Maybe, yeah, I see some new hands going up now. Okay. Never mind. So Ms. Farwell, if you're ready now, you have been promoted, so you can go ahead. We actually have two members of the public in the presenters room now. So Ms. Farwell, if you're ready, you can go first, and then we'll have Mr. Viederman.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you so much. This is Anstress Farwell. I'm at 37 Worcester Place. I'd like to follow up on the last speaker about what does the city get, and actually come back to zoning. During some of the community meetings, there have been discussions of possible funds towards transportation projects or commitments to certain levels of affordable housing. As you know, this is all just discussion. And as much as it is terribly important to think about whether we're going to, how we create safer streets and open up housing opportunities for every New Havener. When we look at zoning, we are really obligated to look at whether the zone itself is a public benefit. And yeah, I would say in this case that a case has not been made that the zone is a public benefit. We've heard some discussion about our comprehensive plan of development looking to establish transit-oriented development, increase the amount of housing, increase mixed-use neighborhoods for businesses that provide jobs. But another part of our comprehensive plan, and a very major part of it, is, and something that many staff reports for zone change quote for good reason, is that the purpose of a zone change, or to keep things as they are, is to make sure you are creating an environment of stability and harmony. And in this case, we've already heard from the applicant who has described how this zone change in this area with the smaller parcels that are not adjacent.
1 minute left.
To an RM zone could easily lead to tall and short buildings. I'd also like to say that this is really a transit adjacent project. It isn't transit oriented. There's been no planning around this to, for instance, even reduce the parking. It's a platform building. And there's been no careful attention to how this connects and relates to this train station or creates safer pathways through the neighborhood, where we have had a lot of serious traffic accidents, including a fatality. So as Linda Reeder said, this needs to be looked at on a neighborhood scale, or in the case of this area, it's downtown Worcester Square is the planning district. And that hasn't been done. So I object to this being done in a piecemeal way, and the change would not lead to a stable or harmonious environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving your testimony. We appreciate your expertise and opinions as always. Any members of the committee with any questions? Seeing none, thanks again. And we will have Will Viederman. Please give your name and address for the record, and you can proceed. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, members of the committee. Thank you for having me. I'm Will Viederman, 75 Warren Street, right around the corner from this lot. Some earlier testimony mentioned the consequences of making this zoning change. I'd like to raise the consequences of not making this zoning change. I am no fan of this landlord. I don't know if any project that comes from this rezoning will be built under the new IZ ordinance. My understanding is that it won't, and that's unfortunate. But if we refuse to rezone, less dense will get built, and any new development will require more parking. And both of those things are things we should work to avoid. Regardless of if we build this building or not, or build a building on this rezoned lot or not, people will still move here. And without new housing, rents will go up and people will get pushed out of our city. That will ultimately fall on the poorest members of our city, the folks who struggle with housing costs the most. And densifying, particularly in areas where it fits neatly into the character right above a train station and adjacent to downtown helps us to manage the upward price pressure of increased demand. Reducing parking requirements does the same. Reducing parking requirements consistently cuts rents, which is an absolute good in tandem with the environmental benefits of reducing car use. This zoning change will help, not hurt. And if we don't make this change, the worst consequences will fall on the people struggling the most in our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, thanks again. We have a couple more people with their hands raised. I'd also like to go ahead and recognize an elected official, not an alder, but a former alder, Representative Roland Lamar, who is with us today as well. Okay, our next member of the public is here, so you can please state your name and address for the record, and then you will have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name's Lisa Salmon, and I live at 78 Olive Street, so in the Smoothie building. And I support this lot being assigned to the BD1 zone because I think the height and density are suitable for the location and will lead to increased housing and lower rents. So I've lived at 78 Olive Street for 8 years, and I very much welcome this zoning change. I believe that taller, more dense buildings are a good fit for that location. It's adjacent to the State Street station and not that far from Union Street. It's walkable to much of downtown and Worcester Street. I believe it will add to the neighborhood, supporting its evolution to a more dense environment, and transit-oriented development is very much supported by this type of density. My understanding of the research on building housing like this is that it tends to lower rent in the nearby neighborhood and contributes to increasing the amount of available housing at all levels of the income spectrum. And to me, that's a hugely important value. Increased density and height will allow for more homes for more people. And this is sorely needed in our community. So I encourage you to support the BD1 zoning change.
Thank you for your testimony. Any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, we appreciate you taking the time. Another former alder, I believe is our next member of the public. Abby Roth, here you are on camera. Give your name and address for the record, presumably enjoying your retirement, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for hearing this. My name is Abby Roth. I live at 42 Lincoln Street, and I appreciate all the comments that have been made tonight. I definitely agree with the critical importance of creating housing on affordability and encouraging transit-oriented development. However, in this case, I do think this approving the zoning and allowing something that would be 13 stories is just too high for this historic neighborhood. And if that was built, you'd lose that neighborhood forever. Not saying not to build there. It's great to build there and add housing, but I think 13 stories for this location is too much. I appreciate the comments of people talking about the risks of always reactive piecemeal zoning and thinking more holistically. So I look forward to hopefully this board having a more whole-scale review of zoning for the city. And finally, just this actually is in my former ward, and I will say, I heard a lot of complaints from residents of BMC. So I echo the concerns of building housing for a developer, a lot of housing for a developer who did not always take such good care of their tenants. So I just wanted to add that for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you for choosing to spend another weeknight with us. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, we thank you for your time. And I see no other members of the public with their hands raised. So if any member of the public wishes to be heard on this item, please raise your virtual hand or otherwise indicate to staff that you'd like to be heard. I'll also remind folks you can submit written testimony, which will go into the public record, public testimony at newhavenct.gov. I'll ask a second time, are there any other members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? And a third time, any other members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? Seeing none, I will ask if any members of this committee have any further questions for the makers of this item while we still have them. I would ask either either Deputy Director Long or even perhaps Alder Marchand, if you could just, I would like to hear just a bit of an explanation about the height issue, just because I feel like at the beginning, people were sort of talking past each other. I think it's in the packet, but just to state it for the record.
If you don't mind just repeating the question, they were bringing me in and I wasn't able to hear the full question.
Absolutely. So in the earlier stages of this hearing, there was some discussion about 70 feet. There were members of the public who pointed out that what this zoning change would allow could be buildings in excess of 70 feet. And so I would just ask for clarity on that point.
Well, again, so what happens is the FAR is what's dictating the height of the building in terms of the shape, size, scale, mass, and so forth. But I think this is interesting about the BD1 as opposed to the BA zoning district, which the zone is now. And I want to take out if I can, for a second, I want to take out the application that may be that may come before you at a later date. I want to look at this holistically from a planning perspective. And from a planning perspective, we as the planning department are contemplating looking at the broader area, the broader context, as mentioned in the City Plan Commission report. With that being the case, I want to read what the BD1 district means or what its intent is. It says these districts, and this is in the zoning code now, these districts, meaning the BD1 district, include appropriate downtown areas which have concentrations of historic structures suitable for both residential and commercial use. This district concentrates residential use at high density mixed with activities that have both a citywide and district-wide function. Small stores offering comparison shoppers goods, specialty stores, business services, offices, and entertainment uses. The use of land is intensive, but respects the historic character of existing historic structures. It is the purpose of these regulations to encourage preservation of existing historic structures, conversion of existing structures to residential use, high density of use, and to exclude activities that have a negative effect upon the proper functioning of National Register historic districts or of the larger downtown. And the one thing about the BA district, the intent behind the BA district, which is the current zone, is, it says, and this is for the BA district, and they also provide locations for small businessmen with a citywide market who cannot operate in the downtown area. So the BD1 zoning district is made for the areas within the downtown to preserve, and again, it can be done through design, to preserve the historic nature of the surrounding area. That is the intent of the BD zone. So essentially, it does allow for greater intensity, maybe a couple of taller buildings, mixed in, but the intent is to allow that in terms of a design and a scale in such a way that it preserves the historic nature of anything that may be surrounding it. And I think that's important to note as we move forward, because we as the city planning department are definitely looking at trying to, again, take out this particular property. We are looking to rezone the entire area, considering the fact that it is adjacent to the train station and that it is arguably on the cusp of downtown.
So thank you, Deputy Director, for that holistic view. I think my question is more concrete and specific. I wonder maybe if Alder Marchand is on my wavelength, and I see his hand up, so I'll recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Deputy Director Long's explanation. I'll just add a little bit to it. I was on the City Plan Commission back in 2014 when the BD1 zoning district was created, and on the Board of Alders at that time as well. And one of the key discussions we had was because we were looking at a map and we were looking at which parts of downtown would be rezoned with this district and what was next to those parts of the city. And so one area that we looked at in particular was Howe Street. So one area that's currently zoned BD1 is a section of Chapel West, including Howe Street. Now, Howe Street, as you know, directly abuts Dwight Street. And Dwight Street, there are some blocks of Dwight Street that have very small historic houses. And so our concern was if we made a BD1 zone that allowed for very large buildings, what does it mean for very large buildings, 13, 12, whatever stories, to be right next to historic houses that were single family houses? We felt like it was appropriate to have some kind of buffer. And so we amended the proposal, which was before us, to say that when the BD1 zone directly abuts a residential zone, there would be a lower floor area ratio allowed and a 70-foot height limit. And the intention at the time was to say, we support creating a zone that would allow for more density in development, but we wanted to step it down a little bit when that zone directly abutted a residential zone. And that's what we ended up with. But I think the key question here is, what does it mean to abut an adjacent zone, right? And so that's the question here. There's already in the portion of the map that's being proposed to be rezoned here, the segment of it that's right next to Olive Street and hence directly across the street from a residential zone, there's already a building there. And so the area that could potentially be more readily redeveloped is the area that is currently parking lot, which is not directly across the street from the residential zone. It's some hundreds of feet back and closer to the train station. And so the question before us is, would the height restriction apply to the entire portion of the city that's being proposed to be rezoned here? And not necessarily, because it depends on what subsequent actions happen in terms of how that parcel is divided or maintained. But if you look at a map and you see a parking lot that's right next to the train station, it's actually not very close to relatively speaking, it's not directly abutting Olive Street. It's not directly across the street from a residential zone. And so that's why some of the folks who've commented have pointed out that the 70-foot height limit for a proposed building in a new zone that's right across the street from a residential zone wouldn't necessarily apply for a portion of that turf that's much farther away and that's close to the train station and the train tracks. And so I think, that would have to be resolved going forward when whatever application is submitted about a particular project and how the parcels are maintained or divided or whatever. But it's not automatic that the height restriction that certainly would apply right next to Olive Street would necessarily apply to the portion of this area of the city that's right next to the train tracks. Does that explain what we're talking about? I hope it does.
It does, absolutely. Thank you for that explanation. I just wanted everyone to be clear about what we're talking about and about, again, what sorts of developments, such as zoning change that we're considering would actually allow. And I just thought that it got a little muddled at part of the other portion. Any members of the committee who have other questions for the applicants? Seeing none, I do see one more member of the public who I think wishes to be heard. And as the public portion of the meeting is not yet closed, I think that would be appropriate. So Misty, if you could let this member of the public in, that'd be great.
Hi, thank you. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to speak a little late. My name's Kaya Day. I live on 9 Pearl Street in East Rock. And I just wanted to offer a comment in support of these zoning changes. I think adding density near downtown and particularly near the train station is super important. And also I'm excited about the fewer parking spots with this zoning change. I think getting rid of parking spots and parking lots and replacing it with housing that can actually be used is super important and really exciting. And I know that like in the 5 years that I've been lived in New Haven, it's been hard to find 1-bedroom apartments that I like, especially in the areas that I want to live, close to downtown, close to the train station. And I know that a lot of my peers would be happy about having more density and more units in a great location like this. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we thank you. And I will now make my last and final calls for members of the public. So anybody else from the public in the attendees list who wishes to be heard on this item, please raise your virtual hand. And again, you're also welcome to submit written testimony for the public record. I'll ask a second time, any other members of the public? And a final call for any members of the public who wish to be heard on the zoning change proposal before us. Seeing none, I will make one last ask of committee members if you have any other questions for the presenters. Yes, Attorney, you can go ahead.
Are you acknowledging me, Mr. Chair? I wasn't sure.
I am. Sorry.
Thank you.
Your name is missing from my screen. So
fine. Chris McKeon, 900 Chapel Street for the record. I wanted to point out just a couple of things that came up in public comment and briefly respond there too. The first is, I think a vast majority of it was directed toward a specific plan for development, which is not what we're here for, and you made that crystal clear at the beginning of the hearing. Secondly, there obviously are some folks who had less than wonderful experiences with PMC and refer to a series of lawsuits that were brought back in 2014 when PMC was opposed to the change to this neighborhood and lost. And, 2014 may seem like only 7 or 8 short years ago, but those were a long 8 years, especially the last 2. And the changes are significant in that time period. Most notably, what's occurred. There are 2 significant developments that are well on their way to completion. So the very precise location has changed considerably. PMC is obviously now wanting to further develop. The fact that there are people who've had less than good experiences with PMC, there's a couple of pieces of information that I think need to be put forward. One, the Strauss-Adler building was completed and filled with tenants in 2002. It's 20 years ago. There's 146 apartments. There are going to be people who have less than perfect experiences, and they are vocal, and rightfully so. But the people who've had great experiences, you're not going to hear from. And there are many of those as well. I would also note that PMC, its numerous projects that it owns throughout the city, including Chapel Square, including College Street, the RKO building, including 38 Crown Street, a new building to be developed at 232 State Street. In the 20 plus years that PMC has been investing in New Haven, they have not sold a project. That is not the case with the 2 projects that brought these zone changes to the neighborhood in the first place. Those properties changed hands from the original applicants. I think it's important to note that PMC is proposing a project and they maintain ownership, and they haven't gone anywhere since they arrived in 2000. So I'm not taking issue with people having had a bad experience. It's regrettable that they did, but I do think there's some misinformation in there about a commitment to the city. Because PMC was converting buildings to apartments before it was in vogue, if you will. It was one of the earlier investors in the city to put its faith in the city, and they intend to do so into the future. So the last point I wanted to make is a number of speakers indicated that this is a piecemeal approach. This piece of property is being added to, obviously, a bunch of other properties that have already been changed to zones. I don't know that piecemeal is exactly an accurate way to describe what's occurring. This is an extension of what's already occurred and probably will continue to occur with respect to some of the other parcels that City Plan Commission has indicated should fall into the BD1 zone as well. So those are the only points I wanted to make. I appreciate your acknowledging me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
If colleagues have any further questions, now would be the time. Otherwise, I will entertain motions.
Mr. Chair,
I don't see any questions.
I move that we close the public portion of this meeting.
Second.
There's been a motion to close the public portion of this meeting, which has been seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the roll based on how it's on my screen. I don't have this in front of me. Alder Marchand?
Yes.
Alder Ferraro Santana?
Yes.
Alder Sabin?
Yes.
Alder Morrison?
Yes.
Alder Furlow?
Yes.
And Alder Kupo?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. The public portion of this hearing is closed. Thank you, everybody. Any further motions?
Mr. Chair, I move the item.
Second.
Now the item has been moved and seconded. Discussion on this item. You can raise your hand virtually or physically. I recognize Alder Sabin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry if what I want to say is a little bit long, but I want to try to explain my thinking about this requested zoning change as much as possible. And I also just want to first acknowledge that this is a really complicated and difficult issue. And I really appreciate all the folks who have come out at the community meetings over the past few months, who've sent me emails and who I've talked on the phone with, my colleagues in the neighboring districts who I've worked with on this difficult issue. I think everyone who's spoken up throughout the process has made a big difference in improving any result that comes of it. So I'm grateful for all the feedback and input that has been part of this. At this point tonight, I think there are two questions before us. The first is somewhat forward, I think, legal question about whether this zone change should be approved. And then the second and related question is about what the impact of the zone change would be and how it fits with our priorities and values as a community and as a city. As the City Plan Commission wrote in its favorable report from their meeting back in January, this zone change is in line with the zone changes that were previously approved at the neighboring properties 630 and 674 Chapel Street in 2014. And my understanding is that the 78 Olive Street site was supposed to be rezoned from BA to BD1 a number of years ago, but that didn't happen for some reason. In our zoning ordinance, the Board of Alders is tasked with approving zoning changes that are consistent with our city's comprehensive plan, that fit with patterns of construction and land use, are in character with adjacent uses, and encourage the most appropriate use of land. Our comprehensive plan, as has been described earlier, encourages high density development near the center of the city and near transit. And I think it's clear that this site fits both of those criteria. In terms of patterns of construction and land use,
I think it's important that this site is also next to several other apartment buildings that create a sort of descending slope of building height between the 31-story building at 360 State and the 2- and 3-story homes in Worcester Square. Lastly, I think we can all agree that housing and retail are much better uses of this very valuable land than a parking lot. Stepping back from these considerations, though, it's obvious that as we're considering whether to approve this zoning change, we also need to think about what kind of development the change would allow on the site and whether that development would benefit our community and our city. If we approve this zone change, as has been mentioned, a 13-story building with up to 136 units would be allowed at this site. That building, based on my expectations, could include 14 units of affordable housing, and it would probably pay around $1 million a year in taxes and contribute significant funding to pedestrian and bike safety improvements in the area. While obviously the details of this proposal should not be a factor in our vote tonight, we are voting on whether to change the zoning for this parcel to allow a project like what I just described to be built. As we've heard tonight, there are a number of people in the neighborhood who feel that the proposed zoning change we're voting on tonight would allow too tall. On the other hand, from a lot of constituents who are excited about this project, who testified today, they saw affordable housing shortage, create new jobs, promote transit-oriented development, and grow our city's tax base. At the end of the day, it's felt to me that the community is pretty split on this issue, which puts us as this committee and as the Board of Alders in a difficult position of making a tough call. Ultimately, though, weighing these factors, I think it makes sense for us to move forward with this item tonight, though I think it also makes sense to continue community conversations about any building that happens or is proposed at this site so that it is truly in the best interest of the neighborhood. I also want to note that in the difference, I'm differing with what is in the city plan report in saying that I think that approval of this zoning change, if it happens, should not set any precedent for any of the other properties nearby. I ran for the Board of Alders because I love the city and I believe that with hard work, we can build a community where everyone has an affordable place to live, everyone feels safe on our city streets, and everyone has access to the jobs and education they need to provide for their family. It is a very difficult decision, but I think moving this zoning change forward tonight will help us get a little bit closer to those incredibly important goals. To me, moving this zoning change forward tonight means supporting 14 new units of desperately needed affordable housing for our neighbors. It means supporting new jobs and construction in the building that would be built here, and more importantly, in the long term, at the many small businesses near this location. Moving the zoning change forward tonight also means supporting lower air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, which we can only achieve if we support dense housing near trains and buses and in one of the most walkable parts of our region. Moving this zoning change forward tonight also means supporting better public safety, as some folks mentioned in public testimony, because having more people in the neighborhood and out on the streets at all times of day is proven to keep communities safe. Moving this zoning change forward also means supporting the city getting millions of dollars in new tax revenue that can help us hire a dozen new housing inspectors to crack down on absentee landlords, or hire new teachers and firefighters, or fix potholes and sidewalks, keep down property taxes, help us provide food assistance to the folks who need it in our community. Moving this zoning change forward tonight also helps address displacement and higher rents across New Haven. As the South Central Regional Council of Governments reported to the Affordable Housing Commission that we created a couple years ago, just last week, we have a huge shortage of housing in our city. The Council of Governments estimated that we're missing 8,500 units of affordable housing and 3,500 units of market rate housing. More density at this site would help us put a small but meaningful dent in those shortages. According to data from Apartment List, and also just talking to folks who live all over the city, rents in New Haven are up 19%, or almost $250 a month over the past year, $250 a month. That is a crisis for thousands of families, and we need to act. Like 70% of city residents, I'm a renter, and I know firsthand how hard renting is in this housing shortage. And so many people have it much worse than I do. With a supply shortage, landlords are able to jack up the rent and skimp on maintenance. And mountains of research has shown that building new housing is the only real way to keep rents from going up when there's a supply shortage. If we don't allow more housing to get built, we are telling folks in Dixwell, in the Hill, and in Fairhaven that we're fine with less affordable housing and higher rents, and we're fine with letting them get pushed out of their neighborhoods by wealthier people who are moving into the city and who would have rented in new buildings if we built them. And we need to make sure to think about that. The building market rate and affordable housing downtown prevents those dynamics. And I'm not trying to be over dramatic, and I really understand the concerns that folks have about this project and this proposed zoning change, but there are real consequences to the zoning and land use decisions we have the responsibility of making on this board, and they'll have a real impact on our neighbors and their families. If we don't build more housing, the people who would move into new market rate units are going to come to New Haven anyway, and they're going to take the housing that working people in our city have been living in for generations, and I don't think we can let that happen. When I think about what I want our city to look like in the future, I think about a city with more affordable housing, more jobs, more services, lower taxes, cleaner air, and safer streets. Ultimately, I believe that approving this zoning change will help us move closer to achieving each of these goals. I also want to say that going forward, I'm 100% committed to working with the community to address any outstanding concerns that folks have with any buildings that are proposed at this site. This zoning change would not deserve final approval in my mind until I and my colleagues feel confident we're going to get the best possible result for our community and our city. So just to wrap up, I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the item before us tonight as we move forward with this difficult but important process. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Sabin. Any further discussion for members of this committee? I see none, unless Alder Morrison is coming on camera to do so. Nope. Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Alder Decker, Mr. Chair. And I'll just say a couple things about the zoning change before us. I appreciate the comments from my colleague from Ward 7. Obviously, this area of New Haven is in his ward, and so it certainly is important to hear his opinion on it for sure. I'll just verify for the record that the City Plan Commission did vote favorably to recommend the board make this zoning change that we've already seen. To boil it down, it's really a question of continuing a pattern of development where downtown is no longer stopping at the train tracks. Downtown, in a certain sense, is stopping at Olive Street. And the folks who live in Worcester Square and in the surrounding areas have felt that change because projects are being built next to Olive Street that are bigger than what they're used to seeing in their neighborhood. And the question is that a good thing? Or is that a bad thing? Or is it a mix? And I think it's a mix. But overall, I think it's good for the city. Now, it's important to hear what the residents of Worcester Square say in the surrounding areas because they're living there and they're the ones who are confronting possible impacts of more intensive development, such as increased traffic, for example, or more noise. But I think from the city's perspective, one of the things that we're trying to accomplish is to make the city attractive for development so that we can have more productive use of our land. And that's good for the city's economic activity and it's good for the city's budget. Now, it's not the only consideration, but it's an important one because New Haven is fully built out. We don't have very many open areas that are not developed. We're not North Haven, for example. We just have a different built environment and we're densely settled. And so what parts of New Haven are suitable for the kinds of development that are happening in our city? Well, fairly large scale residential development is happening and it's hot. And overall, it will bring some significant benefits to the city. And so that's what the zoning change does essentially, is that it makes possible a denser pattern of development for that little piece of the city than what is currently allowed under the zone. I would also note that if the owner of the parcels decide to build a healthcare facility or research facility, they'd be able to do that too. That's another use that's allowed under BD1 that's not allowed under BA. But generally speaking, the BD1 has a shorter list of allowed uses than the BA zone. The BA zone is a wide array of different businesses that are allowed either by right or special exception or special permit. But the BD1, it's like residential, major institutional, like research and healthcare, and not as many other things. And I think what we're really anticipating, although we don't know for sure, is a residential development, because that's what's happening in the city of New Haven. And so do we want to support these large scale developments? And I think overall we do. We obviously have other goals around affordability that other actions we've taken as a board are intended to address, and should address those issues very soon. But I think there's a lot of merit to allowing for a more dense pattern of development in the parts of our city that seem like they could be redevelopable. And there's not that many compared to other surrounding towns. And that development is already having some significant benefits to the city, and it's going to have more. And so I'm speaking in favor of making this zoning text amendment. Let me just say one last thing, which is the city plan report does mention other parcels in the area that the commission thinks ought to be considered for conversion to BD1. And I think we should have that discussion, and we should ask the commission to study it and to make a recommendation and to submit a proposal, to submit a zoning map amendment. But that would also go through 2 public hearings before the commission and before this committee. And so we could always have a different view of it. But there is something to be said about having some coherence in a portion of the city in terms of the patterns of development that we would like to allow there. And so that's another piece of work that can happen subsequent to this process. And I look forward to talking to my colleagues on the commission about that in the months ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Alder Furlow. Alder Furlow, you're still on mute, unfortunately.
How about now?
There you go.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did hear what the community said, and it's been something that I have given great thought to, as this committee has considered various zoning changes and various developments. We've had some disasters in New Haven decades ago in development that eventually had to be redeveloped, and we just wish that we didn't do it. We meaning the city. I always think, what we do today, what is it going to look like in 25 years? What are things going to look like as we continue to build things that are create so much more density? What is the structure going to look like down the road? Having said all that, I want to acknowledge the work that my colleague from the 7th Ward has done. I think that he has been very thoughtful in listening to his remarks with the community engagement. And I think that what we are doing tonight with this proposed amendment is in line with our legislative agenda. And I think that it is also in line with the comprehensive plan for Vision 2025. But I think that we need to keep our thumb on it. And I think that we need to be very thoughtful and pensive of what is being developed. And I have full confidence that our colleague will watch very carefully and continue with the community engagement with what does happen in that area. But in short, I do approve this zoning amendment. I think that everything that City Plan has said and other colleagues in connecting our city together and allowing more density and in moving forward with the direction that we want to see our city move in, I think that this begins that trail in this part of our city. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Furlow. Pardon me, Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I am in support of this, this zone change because when I think about the city at large, and I think about, you know, our younger populations and the need for this increased housing, and the fact that it costs a lot to drive a car, right? And so to have housing in the downtown area that, but not just young people, but all people can move into those areas and get about the town on foot it's really good because again, gas is high, insurance is high, all those different things. And so it takes away that barrier when people are looking for apartments, along with the fact that this developer is also looking at the need for these other amenities that will continue to support the character of the area. And so as Alder Furlow said, we know that our colleague, Alder Sabin, will continue to work with the community, continue to work with the developer to ensure that, you know, what's there is going to work for the character of that community. So I just wanted to say that I think that being able to provide this type of housing and people don't have to have an automobile, one, brings down the cost of rent, and two, it everyone has accessibility to the city at large. And when they want to go to other towns, being right next to the train station. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Any further discussion on the item? Seeing none, I will call the roll for a vote. Alder Sabin.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
Alder Farrar Santana.
Yes.
Alder Furlow.
Yes.
Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Kupo.
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. The item carries. Any further motions? Or else we're going to sit here all night.
Appropriate. Mr. Chair, I ask for a motion, or I make a motion for us to, I always mess it up, to end the meeting.
Adjourn. Adjourn.
It's appropriate unless you'd like to sit here all evening.
Adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's been a motion for adjournment, which has been seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, Alder Sabin.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
Alder Farrar Santana.
Yes.
Alder Furlow.
Yes.
Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Kupo.
Yes.
I vote yes as well. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.